This is the Crappie Connection, brought to you by Redneck Rubber, Power Crappie, Visit Ridgeland, B&M Poles, K9 Fishing, Cornfield Fishing Gear, Bobby Garland Baits, Genco Fishing, Denali Rods, The Direction TV, Top Hat Jigs, Crappie Magnet, Anderson Minnow Farm.
About a mile from the big muddy river, place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away from being out in the sun all day. No matter where in the world I go, I'll always find home on the banks of that oxbow.
What's up, guys? Brad Chappell back with you at the Mid-South Hunting and Fishing Show in Grove, Oklahoma. Got my bud at the end.
Todd Huckabee.
Got another guy here.
Josh Johnston with the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife. I'm the Northeast Region Supervisor of Fisheries.
This is the second time we had Josh on, and I guess it was 2 years ago, and we did Hardcore Crappie Facts, and, you know, we're going to do pretty much about the same thing today, but kind of an updated version, I guess you would say, on how things have changed in a short period of time when crappie fishing goes. But, Josh, we definitely thank you, and I know our viewers always ask questions about that episode, and I'm sure they'll have even questions after this one.
Yeah,
But,
I hope so.
Todd, I know you got some questions already in your mind brewing down there. I can see the wheels spinning.
We don't have enough time, but right before we started actually filming, I had asked him if he felt that, because this is the one that I hear the most through what I see on social media is, we need limits lowered. We need to lower limits, you know, this, that, and the other, because all the fish are getting taken out. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, yeah, absolutely. But then what we're seeing on some of these lakes right now is proving me 100% wrong. So I'm going to let you answer that for us.
Yeah, I get the question a lot, and I mean, don't think that as a biologist or somebody working with these fish that we kind of push this stuff aside. It worried me at first a lot, because you can be quite a bit more successful. I think on a good day, you catch crappie no matter what. On a bad day, though, and you have a live scope, you can scratch together some fish now and before you might go home empty-handed. So it worried me, but we're looking at it. And the more and more I've looked at it, it's just nothing's happening. In fact, we're in better shape right now than I remember in my career, crappie-wise. And in that time frame, in the last 3 to 5 years, we've had COVID hit and twice as many people out angling. We've had the inception of live scope, which was supposed to put more pressure on these fish too, and it has. But we also had the just incredible wet years, especially 2019 with that flood that lasted throughout the early summer and late spring. And we've seen crappie populations just flourish based on that, especially here in Northeast Oklahoma. We're sitting here now in Grove, Oklahoma, right out on Grand Lake. And Grand Lake is one of those places that we have to have less of a limit. We have a 15-inch limit, 10 fish, or 10-inch limit, 15 fish a day. The reason for that is because they pull a lot of water out of it, for hydroelectricity.
Yeah.
And so you can miss year classes altogether. And so we have to be a little concerned. So it's even more concerning if you see, hey, live scope, all this pressure, everybody's catching fish. It can get a little concerning, but I'm looking at that population right now, and the 2019 year class is bigger than any year class in the system right now. So no matter how many people are catching these fish, and they can only take that year class, some of the 2s and the 3s, and it's still larger than your age 1 year class. We're talking millions of fish between 10 and 13 inches swimming around in that lake right now. So it's hard to tease all this out. Did that flood overtake what live scope can take out and what the pressure from COVID and people going fishing can do, or is this just crappie? And at the end of the day, I mean, we've said forever, I said on your last show, and I'll say it again, crappie fisheries don't work without high harvest. They just don't. We'd have terrible crappie fisheries if we had no harvest or low harvest. But there is a limit there.
Yeah, it would do more damage if we didn't have the harvest.
Absolutely. And so you look at these things like this, and I think the biggest threat to me still in my mind, and I don't think it's a threat, but in my mind it's high grading. And that is, you become so successful. I don't think the limits we have set, even at 37, are going to make a difference in these larger lakes for sure. But high grading is something that concerns me in these small lakes. But, you know, I've kind of thought through it the last few years, and I think it works about like anything else. A crappie's lifespan is, you know, about 4 years. Some of them will get a little older. Some of them won't make it to 4 years. So they're not a long-lived species. They grow pretty fast, and they get up to that level fast. And if you've got a 3-pound fish or a 4-pound fish, it wasn't supposed to get there. You know, an average crappie maybe can make it to 2 pounds. So it gets there, and it gets there quick. And let's say it exists in this little muddy lake somewhere. We hear this all the time. Hey, I found 2-3 pound crappie in this little lake. I'm not even going to name a name. It doesn't matter. But you could take that 110-acre lake, and you take it, the pressure that it gets then in the next month. And you hear that they caught 29 3-pound crappie out of this little lake. Well, what happens when they don't catch a 30th one? They go find another little muddy lake, and they forget about this one for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and it just rebounds and it comes right back. They didn't hurt the population in any way. They just took some of those older fish out, and
They were probably going to die anyway pretty soon.
absolutely. I mean, we don't know if they're doing anything for the population. Maybe they're passing on some of those genetics, but at that point, they had those genetics in them when they were 1 year old or 2 years old and spawning. They've already passed on those genetics at that point. So I don't know if you're doing anything good by putting that big fish back, outside of the fact of giving somebody else the potential to catch that fish, which is a good thing. But population-wise, is it a good thing? No. We don't ask people to shoot the youngest bucks and the Jake turkeys. We ask them to shoot the ones that have passed on their genetics and you know, are at towards the end of their life. And so I think we have to look at it that way sometimes.
So explain to the people listening high grading.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I said high grading. High grading would be, you know, with live scope, I think there's a potential now that instead of going out and catching 15 crappie over 10 inches in Grand Lake, you might be able to get those 15 that are 13 or bigger. You know what I mean? And some guys and gals are good enough at this technology that they're not even looking at the little fish anymore. They're literally out there just looking for these big fish, and they're pretty successful at catching them. So everybody will tell you they caught a 3-pound crappie sometime in their life, but before they got a live scope, I would say 90% of them are telling you a lie. You know what I mean? A 3-pound crappie is big, guys.
Oh, yeah. I would even increase that percentage to like 99.
You're probably right. So, yeah, that's an issue, but population-wise, biologically, it's not an issue. And then, like I said, we're looking at populations as a whole, and just to end that story, we're not seeing anything. I wish I could say that I'm seeing, wow, this is taking a bad effect, because I thought we'd see something, but in my lakes in the northeast region of Oklahoma, our crappie populations maybe haven't. I've worked for the department for 18 years, and this is the best I've seen them in 18 years.
And probably that factor came in from nature. Mother Nature caused that increase. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And you've heard stuff on, if you're a quail hunter, you've heard the same thing your whole life. Quail and crappie are a lot more tied to environmental factors and habitat than what humans can do to them. Now, we can cause problems through pollution and stuff like that, but I'm talking about angling. We just almost, you got to have a strange situation where you can impact a crappie population in a large reservoir through angling. The environmental factors are going to have a way
it kind
bigger
of really blew my mind. I think it was about 12, 13 years ago on Eufaula, and Danny had told me that he still thought that with the millions of crappie that were harvested out of Eufaula, he still thought that there was more that died every year from natural causes than what was harvested out.
Yeah, and I absolutely would agree with him.
Wow.
That more die of old age than by hook.
Old age and everything else that gets them.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, like, you know, being selective on your harvest. In my mind, it always goes back to, you know, catch the legal rim, no matter what that lake is. But I see some guys that they thrive to just fill up a freezer. And that's, you know, my mind is going back to, hey, definitely catch what you need, eat what you need, and even your neighbors or whoever that you're help providing for. And I think live scopes definitely increase people's success rate like you do. I see it more and more. And, you know, I think it's helped grow the sport of crappie fishing. What are you seeing on the growth of fishermen? Do you think it's increased from live scope or just because of COVID, or what's kind of your take on the more people fishing wise?
I think it's both. Live scope definitely moved a lot of already anglers to crappie fishing, to crappie angling. And not to say they didn't crappie fish before, but there's a lot of guys that went out and they caught their crappie in the spring prior to this, and they thought that's when you crappie fished. You know, they'd call and say, hey, when do crappie start biting? Like they didn't bite the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. Now they've got a live scope and they're crappie fishing. They're crappie fishing in the winter, crappie fishing in the summer. I know a bunch of tournament bass anglers that are crappie fishing on the side, and they weren't doing that before. They were doing it in the spring in an opportunity-based deal. So I think you've got that. I think COVID has added to it. But I think there's good and there's bad to that, and crappie's such a delicate thing. It's good that we've got so many more popular, you know, it's gotten so much more popular. The issue is the anglers are growing too. Their knowledge is growing in the way that they, you know, the human nature things taking over, like we've seen it do in other sports, hunting and angling sports, that where you start thinking a different way. And what I mean by that is there's a lot, crappie has always been a food fish, and it kind of works that way, and it needs to work that way. We have to be really careful about what we tell people to do when crappie fishing, because there's a lot of places that the best thing that could happen for that system is for somebody to come in and take 5-gallon buckets of 7 and 8 inchers out.
Right.
And I get a lot of calls and say, hey man, if they'd put these back, they'd grow up. And I'm going, no, I've looked at the ages, and those 7 and 8 inchers range from 1 to 7 years old, and somebody's got to take them, you know? So it's really hard to get into that. But what I'm seeing with the popularity of crappie fishing going up is also this trophy mindset starting to grow. So you got a lot of guys out there that think, man, if we threw all these back, guess what we'd have? Or what would we have if we started implementing trophy slot limits and just crazy stuff that we've never really thought of with crappie? Because, you know, not to say some of it wouldn't work in certain situations, it's just really hard to see where it would work. And the sense that they're just so environmentally tuned. They are boom and bust species. There's a reason why they're so prolific and they have 60,000 eggs as opposed to fish that don't. It's because there's a lot of times they don't make it. Unstable water, weird situations, they just don't recruit. So they have to put, you know, a lot of effort into just like filling the world with crappie in case we don't make it for a couple years type deal. And so it gets strange looking at the way angler attitudes are changing, where you're seeing this trophy mindset start to take place. But it's a delicate balance where we've got to keep it, you know, we got to keep the anglers knowing that without high harvest, you know, this just doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I'm taking away from what you just said is, at the end of the day, it's still just a crappie. We're overthinking it and trying to create something that we're not going to have a big influence on.
Yeah, for the most part, that's true. I think there's definitely things we can do in certain situations that can help. But in a lot of situations, you get these factories like like Eufaula and Oologah, and I don't know that there's a lot we can do, Todd, to change what's going on there.
Right. I mean, 2 years ago, you know, when I spoke to you, everybody down there thought, "Oh my God, what have we done? We've destroyed a 107,000 acre lake. There's no fish anywhere." And then all of a sudden, they just showed up out of nowhere. We had about a 6-month period where nobody down there could find any fish, could catch nothing. It was a ghost town. And then all of a sudden they just showed back up like, here we are. They just hid for 6 months. And,
Yeah.
you know, and we were talking about the oxygen level and all that, which I would love for you to go into and explain to everybody.
Yeah, so that was a weird situation. I'll start by saying that crappie populations, they're just so boom and bust like that. And a lot of people that are listening to this might, especially if you're from around here, you might remember Grand Lake in 2005. We had missed 2 or 3 straight year classes, and we literally had like no crappie. It got so bad that there was a senator or a congressman, one, that was basically trying to make the Department of Wildlife turn their hatcheries into crappie hatcheries across the state to restock Grand with crappie. And the thing with crappie is like, that's pointless. We could never stock what a few of them could do. And they weren't all gone. They were just almost all gone. And it only takes 2 or 3, you know, it's kind of like moving threadfin shad. You move 500 to Grand Lake and people are like, that's not going to do anything. And then they spawn once in the lake, you can walk across the water on them. So you just got to let them rebound. That little thing at Eufaula, though, that was a strange deal. And I deal with it with something like it on Keystone Lake, and you get these riverine lakes, and the Corps of Engineers kind of running water in a certain way to manage floods, and then Southwest Power's using it to generate electricity. So you've got water coming in and water going out, and there's this delicate balance of the lake running properly. So the lake wants to stratify, and when I say stratify, it wants to build a thermocline in the summer where you've got these 2 level layers of water, and the bottom layer is anoxic, no oxygen, but it's cool water, and it's separated from this top layer, and it can't mix. And the top layer is warm water, but it's really high in oxygen. It's where all the algae is blooming. It's where all the sunlight's penetrating. And you get into an issue in places like Keystone where you've got no thermocline, no stratification happening because of the way the rivers come together and the way they run it out. And that year in Eufaula, I think about the same thing happened. Just the way that it went, the stratification never happened, thermocline never developed. So what you get is you get this huge volume of water that is about the same temperature. So if it's a hot summer too, so it's 89 on top and it's 87 on the very bottom. And the other bad thing is that by it being about the same, you don't have the viscosity difference to cause the layers not to mix. So now it's mixing all the time, and where that light's not penetrating, you don't have oxygen. So you're mixing up this huge amount of water, and you don't have a lot of oxygen anywhere, and you've got high heat everywhere. So there's no refuge for the fish to get out of the heat, and there's not enough oxygen for them to be able to keep up with their metabolism. So you end up having these fish that just go into hiding. They literally are just trying to survive. They can't expend the energy to eat. Happens with striped bass, especially in hot summers, but every summer in Keystone Lake. And we have die-offs, massive die-offs. And these fish don't die from being hot, and they don't die from not enough oxygen. They die from starvation. They just don't eat. Because they're so uncomfortable that they have to just sit still for that long. And I know the crappie that you did catch that year were really poor, and they didn't look like they'd been eating. And so, I mean, that just weird stuff like that can happen. And I think that was all due to oxygen levels and water quality.
And that could happen in pretty much any body of water, what you're talking about there, or is it just like a lake that's getting pulled for hydropower or what have you? Yeah,
it'd be really hard for destratification or no stratification to happen somewhere in the south if you didn't have a massive flow of water that could come in and go out. So I don't know if I made sense, but if you're not dealing with a hydropower dam or a massive dam, they're not trying to bring it down for some reason, then you're probably not going to run into that issue.
I know the lake that I got on, Lake Washington, it just seems like when that water temperature gets at 85 to 90, fish are just about impossible to catch. And I've always, in my mind, they pretty much went nocturnal. You know, what's your kind of opinion on the situation? A small body of water, shallow overall. What happens to them when it gets that hot? Is it nocturnal, you think, or?
I think, I mean, some guys would tell you that most of your sport fish out there feed at night anyway. And I don't know that I believe that or not. But I mean, there's a lot of people in some studies out there that say most of the feeding, especially in those summer months, goes on at night with sport fish like crappie and largemouth bass. I don't know that to be true or not, and I don't know about the nocturnal deal, but I know that when that water temperature gets up there above 85 degrees, especially in these centrarchid species, bass, crappie, things like that, they start getting stressed. And fish under stress don't eat as much as they should. They're just not vigorous. I mean, they're still opportunistic. They need to eat. Their metabolism's up because it's hot, but at the same time, they're uncomfortable and they're stressed. It's the same reason why we have so many fish kills in the summer after tournaments. With, you don't see fish kills very rarely with bass tournaments or something like that, or crappie tournaments in the winter or even in the spring. When that water temperature creeps up to 85 degrees, it starts getting not good, and those fish are stressed.
Yeah, but let's talk about catch and release when it comes to crappie. How delicate are they actually to release?
I don't think there's nearly as good of studies as there are with bass out there to show just how delicate they are, but I can tell you that they're in the same family, and they are delicate to it. And I think I've talked to you about this before, and I think we need to be pretty careful about mandating things like catch and release with crappie in tournaments, especially if you want to continue to have those in warm water months. Because what will happen is if you think you're doing the right thing by turning these fish loose in warm water months, during the summer, water temperatures 80 to 90 degrees, you're going to have fish kills. And it may not be right off the bat. It may take 6 weeks for these fish to die, but they're just so stressed at that point they can't come out of it, and they go ahead and they die. And when you start having that, you've seen the bass tournament groups have basically gone away from summer. When I was a kid, summer was when everybody fished, and it's gotten to where you don't see a lot of bass fishing, at least at the competitive level, happening in the summer. And that's great. That's great because it wasn't good. The way that it worked, it wasn't good. But with crappie being a species that I've said before, harvest is good. It's not bad. It doesn't hurt my feelings if you want to turn them back, but you're not helping a lot by doing it in most cases. So if you want to continue to have summer tournaments, those fish need to be taken out, or you're gonna kind of mold your own trail of how this trophy crappie angling goes. If you don't, you'll kind of build the seasons whether you want to or not, because society and other anglers are going to look and say, hey, these guys are killing all these fish. But if you take them home and you put them in grease, nobody says anything.
Right. I know I've just seen it in the past that, you'll release them in the summertime, and, I'm not going to sit here and say I discourage people from releasing fish, because that's far from the case. But I think it's also the mindset that, all right, this is a trophy fish. I've got to release him. If that fish is hooked, anywhere near the gill plate, he's probably going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, you need to go ahead and take him. I think selective harvest is, a good thing, and I think it could be a bad thing. I think it just goes back to that one particular situation of what you're doing at that particular day. In February, if you catch a fish and he's, hooked deep, go ahead and keep him. But if he's not hooked deep, throw him back if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
So, question that I've got for you is, you come to Eufaula that does not have a size limit, and I hear it 10 times a day. oh man, oh so and so down there, he had his limit, but 12 of them was less than 9 inches long, and I'm like, so? I mean, if he is fishing legally with a fishing license, doing it all legal, and he's following the rules, I don't have an issue with guys that do that, because I like seeing people that keep a mixed bag. If they got 37, they got 12 under 10, and they got another 12 that are from 10 to 12 inches, and then a few that are in that 12 to 14 inch range. So back when you were talking about being selective with certain size of fish, do you think it's better to keep a mixed bag, or what's your thoughts?
I think in most cases it's best to keep a mixed bag. In cases like this, if you're not on a place like Grand Lake or one of these high flow through miss year class type deals, the reason we have a 10-inch minimum length limit here is crappie in a healthy population reach sexual maturity at about 10 inches. 2 years old, right about 10 inches. So all we're trying to do is, in a situation like this, all we can do in any sort of management is say, let's give all those fish a chance to spawn. And outside of that, we can't really do anything. It's not going to help to just leave them in the system, but at least give them a chance to spawn. Most of the time, this would not make any difference, but in those bad years, it probably makes a big difference. Eufaula is not like that. And so what I think is, I hear that too. Hey, I see that this guy he kept all his fish and they're all about 8 inches. Well, what I would tell that angler is, if we looked at this population, if he really caught those fish and they're all about 8 inches and he's got 37 of them, and we looked at this population right now, I'd probably be able to find that the highest portion of the population in a single year class, and they're 8 inches. And he's doing better for this population than you would do elsewise, because who's competing the most for the same food source? It's those 8 inchers. And that's how you get stunting. Are you going to get stunting in a place like Eufaula? Probably not. It's too big. It's too many crazy things going on. But that's how you get stunting. Stunting doesn't happen because there's not any food to eat. Stunting happens because everybody's the same size, and fish feed based on their gape width. That's the size of their mouth. And you can have all the shad in the world, but if you've got 8 billion fish, crappie that are 6 inches long, the shad will be all bigger than what'll fit in their mouth, because they've already eaten everything that'll fit in their mouth. There's too many of those fish at that size, and they just can't push past that. And so sometimes a mixed bag's good, and that's what I like to see. But if they're catching that many 8-inch fish and they want to take them home, they're probably doing some good.
What are some of the ways y'all actually go to a lake and gather the information that you see for a lake? How do you come up with your facts? Yeah,
so most of our crappie data is gathered through trap nets, which are it's a pike net basically, and it's a big trap that's on the end of a long lead, and these leads aren't made of monofilament like our other nets. They're made of big dark nylon, and basically the crappie, they're kind of a schooling fish, and we do it during the fall because they really move up to the banks and they move a lot. They're not hanging out on brush, they're just moving a lot and they're feeding. And so you get these schools that go up towards the bank. This thing's running, the lead's running off the bank, and it's leading out to a trap. And basically the fish hit the lead and they see it, and it's an obstruction. It's big, dark nylon net they can't get through. So they just turn towards the main body of water and they swim past the lead. Well, when they do that, when they get to the end of the lead, they swim into this trap. Basically, it's like a big square trap that follows into a funnel tube type of, you've seen crab traps and stuff that are those funnel tube type deals that are hoop nets. And they end up in that, and then we can go out and we can pick that net up and have a net night's worth of data, and we'll have a certain amount of net nights, and that's how we get almost all of our crappie to look at, pull otoliths, the inner ear bone, to get ages, all of that stuff, get population estimates through trap netting. And then another piece is angler data. And we're not very good at that, and there's not a lot of states that are. You go to places like Minnesota that are DNR states, they have a lot of money, and you get on a Minnesota lake, you've probably been creeled by somebody, because they have creel clerks, kids from college that drive a boat around and take this data. We don't have that, so it's really hard for us to get a lot of that stuff done because we're kind of pulled in so many ways. But we gather creel data, And that's how we get the angler side of it. There's one other way. It's not as good, but we get quite a bit of data. We have an angler survey that goes out to a big portion of the licensed individuals per year. And, the ones that fill it out and send it in, we get some data from that.
Okay, then you just kind of look at the overall thing and say, hey, our data showing that our age class is, like you said, for a Grand Lake, you're just superior than what it's ever been. Would you ever adjust just off of that 1 year data class regulations, or do you kind of look at a multiple years to adjust anything for a particular, like Grand Lake?
Yeah, we would look over many, many years. And basically, when you look over many years at a Grand Lake, the reason why we have that different limit than the rest of the state, basically, you'll see that it's not. You look at 1 year or 2 years and you go, wow, they could afford a lot more, thinning out or something. But if you look at it over 10 or 20 years, you think, whoa, has the potential to do a lot of different stuff. So that's why we're where we are, and it would probably remain that way unless we just had something weird happen where we just completely overpopulated them and we needed to get rid of some of those younger ones. Or smaller ones. I said younger. See, like an angler. That's always the thing. Like, oh, they're keeping all the younger fish. And it's like, nah, they're not always younger.
Explain that one.
Yeah, so we've got a lake. I mean, I can put it in terms of a lake, and probably nobody's heard of it, but it's a lake called Sahoma in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. Smaller reservoir, and there's thousands and millions and millions and millions of crappie between 4 and 7 inches. And they range from 1 to, I think the oldest one we aged this year was 11. And that's not normal for a crappie to even make it to 11, but you look at lots of them, you'll find a weird one, but they're literally from 4 to 7 inches, and they're stunted. And we've done everything we can, and anglers, would have to take as many as they can. We've stocked hybrid striped bass. We've stocked sauger, trying to get stuff that'll eat these things and crop them down. I think we need a huge, gigantic flock of cormorants, and maybe that would help a little bit. But yeah, that's what I meant by that. You can go in that dock to this day, and you'll talk to 3 anglers that say, man, you should have been here earlier. You a game warden? No, I'm a fish biologist. Well, you could have probably helped. This guy came in here, and he had a bucket, and he kept 25 of those fish that are like 6 inches long. And I told him if he'd just let them grow, some of us would finally be able to catch some good fish over here.
Yeah.
I'm like, you've been catching these fish over here just like this for 20 years, and you haven't figured out they're just...
So Claremore Lake's another one that's just like that.
Yeah. We helped Claremore. Claremore's getting a little bit better, but it would need so much more. Basically, what happened at Claremore was, and this happens a lot. I'm glad you brought it up, Todd. The city of Claremore has this lake, and there were a couple people on the city council that were crappie anglers back 30 years ago, 20 years ago. And they said, man, this place has never been great for crappie. We want it to be like Grand Lake. So what did they do? They put a 10-inch minimum link limit and a 15-a-day creel on it. And it went absolutely south, like so bad, because the only harvest that was happening was good. And you had fish now. I mean, people would say, I'm fishing 3 weeks to catch one of what considered a keeper. We went to the city council. The city council said, no, we don't want to change it. We want it to be like Grand Lake. I said, well, it's not going to be. There's reasons why Grand Lake is set like that, and you need all the harvest you can get. We got them talked into getting rid of the minimum link limit, but we did not, because it is high pressure. You see how many people go over there and fish. We couldn't get them to go to 37 a day. They said, that'd kill it. They'll all be gone. So they didn't listen to us on that because, they just thought there was too high pressure. And I can see it. The weird thing about Claremore, though, is not only is it highly vegetated, very stable, so they get really good spawns, it's also got, it gets filled by a large pipe that comes straight from Oologah Lake. And Oologah Lake is a crappie factory. So there are a lot of crappie coming into that lake through immigration. At the same time, they're having great spawns, and it's just going to be hard for them to get out of it. But it is getting a little bit better. I noticed that education helped quite a bit over there. We talked to them, got them to change the creel limit, and then talked to some of the anglers. And it wasn't 2 years after we got some of that stuff changed that I had a text message from a guy that was 85, I think, and he said he'd been fishing Claremore Lake since its inception with his dad, and he was holding these 2 fish over 13 inches, and he said, I've never caught a crappie over 13 inches of Claremore Lake my whole life, and fished it for 60 years, I think he said, and he had 2 in one day. So it's going to be hard to get on top of that, but you can do things to help it.
Mm-hmm. What's some of the facts when it comes to, and I still see it all the time, what temperature range does the spawn start?
Yeah, and I used to be really good at these temperature ranges, and I believed them, and now I'm starting to, get more into, I think fish spawn so opportunistically, and when they, when all the conditions are right. We've had too many Februaries where water temperature creeps up and gets to 62, and the peak of the spawn doesn't happen for me to say that 62-degree water temperature. But if you want to know water temperatures, I've always said 58 to 62, 63 is, you should be crappie fishing.
Yeah. And
if that coincides with here in Northeast Oklahoma, when you get to your area of the world, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different for Todd, but here in Northeast Oklahoma, if that coincides with the first weekend or two in April, it's going to be really good. If you've got 58 to 62, 63 degree water temperature during those first 2 weeks of April, it's going to be really, really good.
Now, do you ever see lakes that just, let's say in 2 weeks, they all spawn out?
Yeah, it's hard for us to put pinpoint that with the way we sample, but absolutely, we get years. It seems like lately we've had more of a strung out spawn because we've had crazy storms, cold fronts, one after another. But you can have a year, and it happened because of the cold fronts, 2015, 16, somewhere in there. We had one of those years. Todd will probably remember it, but man, up here in Northeast Oklahoma, it was still below freezing in the mornings, 1st of May. And we got a really big warm front that came in May 5th to the 10th, somewhere in there, every species of fish that spawn in the spring, and they usually don't at the same time. So crappie will spawn a little bit before the bass, 2 weeks usually, 2 weeks to a month before the bass. That year, we had our crappie spawn, our bass spawn, and our sunfish started spawning in the same week. And those bass and crappie, it was like 3 or 4 days, and they were done.
Yeah, they'd been holding on a long time, but even then, that year on Eufaula, I'll never forget. It was the week of the 4th of July holiday, out on the main lake, on some rock piles, we still caught some fish. So you're talking about normal March, April, all the way into July. There was just a few stragglers out there that we found that. The males were colored up solid black, and the females had eggs rolling out of them when we pulled them.
On a scientific level, is it better to be spread out, or would it be better for them to do it all at once?
Scientific level, all at once. There's a reason why we see a peak in spawns and a peak in like rut and deer and things like that. When you get into these animals that are preyed upon by a lot of other animals, safety's in numbers. And we as humans don't have to deal with that, so we can have our kids when we want. But if you were, if you had a deer fawn born in October and one born in December, none of them are going to make it. But if you've got all of them fall at once, the predators get full pretty quick, and most of them make it because they're able to get to an age that they can take care of themselves. And it's the same thing with fish. There's good things about it too. The strung out ones are good to see when you have those weird years. You're happy that it didn't all happen at once, and then this storm came, or the Corps had to pull the bottom out of the lake and everything was left high and dry. You'd be in trouble. So there's good sides to both of it, but biologically, it's really good for them to have a peak, and for most of them to get born at about the same time.
I didn't know that. I was kind of thinking on the fence, well, maybe it'd be better if it was spread out, or maybe it'd be better, like you just said there. So that kind of answers my question when it comes to that spawn.
Yeah, and Todd, maybe what you've seen, this kind of gets into stuff that people I don't know. I don't know if a lot of people want to talk about it because it kind of gets a little crazy. At least biologists don't like to talk about it. And I hate to even mention it, but you hear about this like super spawn and stuff like that. Are they spawning in the fall? And I say no, no, they're not spawning in the fall. There's reasons they don't spawn in the fall. There's no food to eat if they spawn in the fall. But are they spawning a second time in July? That could happen.
So they're just retaining some eggs and
No, they're putting on new eggs. In that case, and that could have been the first time that fish spawned, or it could have been the second time that fish spawned. But I can tell you, I started my job working at a hatchery in southwest Oklahoma, and it was the craziest thing I've ever seen because I was right out of school and I thought I knew everything about fish. And I worked for this old guy that, you know, he was really old and he had no school training or anything. He'd just been doing it forever, and we had to grow these bluegill sunfish to get our bass through the summer. And so we go and we catch 50 of them, and we think we've got about 50, 25 males and 25 females, and we throw them in this pond, and they spawned really quick. And the pond was empty, and we start filling the pond next to it, and he said, okay, now we got to get all these out of here once those eggs have swum up and they don't need the adults around anymore. We got to get all the adults out, and we got to get them in that pond immediately. And I thought, why? And he was like, well, so they can spawn. And I thought, this doesn't make any sense. And we pulled them out of there and we threw them over there. And I'm telling you, the males immediately saw, oh man, this is an empty system. There's no fish here.
Yeah.
And we're at the bottom of the food chain. And they start making nests immediately. And those females were ready to go in a week. And they spawned. And we did that with 3 or 4 ponds in one, like a 2-month period.
You just opened up Pandora's box. I can't imagine the comments that we're getting ready to have on this now.
Well, that kind of makes sense to me, though.
But I had never thought about it.
Yeah, I haven't either.
It's really hard. If you think about it, I don't want people to think this could happen with every kind of fish. But you think about it, crappie they're really bad parents. They have 60,000 little eggs that they don't put a lot of energy into, right? Where a bass has only got 3,000 to 8,000. You get into a paddlefish. Paddlefish can't do this. Paddlefish might spawn once every 3 years because they're putting a lot of energy into those eggs. They're more like a human. Like we don't have all the energy in the world to do this. We got to make sure it works. So let's choose the right time. Crappie are like, let's do it for as many years as we can with 60,000 eggs, put them everywhere, and some of them will make it. And when you take something like that, they can really do this. Bass would have a harder time. Sunfish and crappie, though, they're all in the same. The reason I keep saying sunfish, bass, crappie, they're all centrarchids. They're very close family members. And so they're all sunfish family fish. And so a crappie's right there with the sunfish. I think it would probably be a pretty normal thing if conditions are right and if they have that environmental cue that says, hey, the population's a little low, we probably ought to try again. Things line up right that they do it twice. I'm not saying that a crappie couldn't do it 3 or 4 times. I don't know that that's documented, but I know that there could be multiple spawns. I just don't think they're happening in the fall in places like that because it would be pointless. That fish that spawn in the fall wouldn't carry on their genetics to anybody, and you wouldn't have natural selection that caused more fish to spawn in the fall because they don't have any food.
How often do black crappie and white crappie spawn together?
I think it's pretty rare. I think you see this happen in sunfish a lot because they're kind of group nest spawners where black and white crappie, there's reasons why you don't see this in nature. I mean, you'd kind of get rid of your species if you did, but black crappie, I think from what I've seen, they spawn in a little bit cooler temperature and they definitely choose less turbidity or less muddy areas. And it's kind of weird. I mean, if you get into black crappie during the spawn, there's places that I can go all over northeast Oklahoma and we'd catch a mixed bag today in the same exact area. Like they'd be half black, half white. But if you're going in the spawn, during the spawn, and you're actually catching fish that are spawning, it's not normally like that. If you're on black crappie, you're on black crappie. If you're on white crappie, you're on white crappie. And that's just, it's written in their genetic code that we need to do something a little bit different or we're going to, basically our species is going to end.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I just don't think it happens very often.
I know Ross Barnett Lake I fished many years, and I honestly probably believe it's just a genetic deal, but I'm starting to see more and more fish with a black stripe from their nose and some portion up to their dorsal fin up top. Is that more of a genetic gene?
Yeah, basically it's a morphometric trait. You've seen the same thing. I don't know if either of you have fished in places where they stock trout in the winter, but you'll get some of those golden trout, and that's just a 1 in 10,000 rainbow trout can exhibit that golden color. But if you take that fish and you take all the golden ones you can find and you start a hatchery and you use them as the parents, you get more and more of the golden ones. And so the black striped crappie, magnolia crappie, whatever, it's just a black crappie. It's not a hybrid. It's just a black crappie, but it has a morphometrical trait, a morphological trait to have that black stripe. And so when you see some like 10 Killer Lake, Oklahoma, you're going to catch more than one. You know, once they're there, as long as they're not selected against, as long as like birds can't see them better and eat them more readily, or humans take them all out, then you're going to have that gene in the system, and it's going to keep passing through.
I just see it growing more. I mean, I don't know how many I caught last year, but it was quite a few. And through the years, I'm starting to see them more and more. Maybe they, you know, and I hear at first, well, that's just a hybrid crappie, and I'm like, well, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's not. And I kind of wonder on some things like this, if you don't see more and more of them. I've fished with guys before. I've crappie fished with guys that throw everything in the bucket, and you catch one of those, hey, this is a black striped crappie, I'm going to throw them back.
Yeah,
so,
might have happened.
Yeah, it's kind of like white deer. We got into that deal where people would see some albino or what piebald deer, and we actually made a state law at some point that you couldn't shoot them without director approval. And it went from that was the rarest thing in the world to see, that now you get on Facebook and it's every hunting season. Somebody's got pictures of white deer. Well, I mean, we're purposely not shooting them.
What about these golden crappie? And I've seen quite a few this past month that somebody's caught this crappie, and honestly, it looks almost like a goldfish.
Yeah, I have not been lucky enough to see one, Brad, and I've been hoping one got turned in somewhere. I have looked at a couple pictures of them, but they've all been from a different state. Some guy caught one ice fishing just the other day, somewhere, and they're cool. I mean, they're bright goldfish looking. I need to look into it a little bit more, but it's another one of those morphological traits.
It's just,
I think it's normal in fish to have
like
a golden gene. I think that's just normal in fish, because really, if you've ever grown goldfish, this is a crazy thing. This is going to get some people right here. If you've ever grown goldfish, we used to do it in the hatchery for forage for some fish, and 90% of those, even when you start with 2 goldfish, 90% of the babies came out looking drab like a carp. But if you're selling those, you know, you only pull the good ones out, and over the time you get more tighter genetics that you got more gold ones. So basically, a goldfish is very close to a common carp. And I think they just have that. They've just, over time, people have bred for that morphological trait. And so just judging by that and the fact that we have it in trout, and you're seeing it in crappie and stuff, I just think there must be a pretty prevalent gene for that gold color in fish. And I don't know why.
Do you think that maybe the reason why we don't see more gold crappie is because they stand out like a sore thumb and get eaten before they get big enough to harvest?
Yeah, that's why you rarely see mutations or morphological traits like this in nature.
It draws attention to them.
Because it draws attention. I mean, you think about a white deer back in the days where we had lots of predators out there. There was no chance of things making it, right? And a golden crappie, yeah, it's in trouble.
So, you know, if you think about a school of, say, inch-long crappie fry, and who knows, maybe 1,000,000% of them are gold, those are probably going to get taken out really quick.
Really fast. I know we'd throw those little bluegill in a bass pond at a hatchery, and I'm not saying they don't get eaten, but they can hide pretty good, and the bass have to work at it. And when we'd get those goldfish and chunk them in there, I mean, it was almost like I felt bad about it. Those fish didn't have any trouble finding them. They got them.
What
all
about,
of them.
Like, what's the normal stages of crappie? Once they hatch, where do they normally go? These little fry, where do they go in a lake? Do they stay in the shallows most of their life until they get a certain age, or where do they go?
Yeah, I think it depends on kind of the system that you're in. If you're in a riverine system, they can get swept around in currents and stuff like that. But you also notice that crappie try to get out of the current. You don't ever want to, for the most part, you don't want to go looking for your spawning crappie in like a high flow area. You kind of want some backwater, but something that's stable too. That being said, those fish, if there's vegetation present, they're going to be in that vegetation. That's the best place for them. If there's no vegetation present, you come to a place like Grand Lake, then you'll just see those kind of balls of fry, but they're in really shallow water most of the time unless they get swept somewhere.
I know last year I seen something in crappie fishing I'd never seen before, and it was water temperature was, I think it was 34 degrees. And I seen and because of live scope, I'd never seen before, of course, but with live scope, I noticed a school of crappie, and it was probably, I say 300 or 400 fish, and literally they were stacked side by side on top of each other and just so tight together, and they weren't even swimming. What were they doing? Just safety, or what would your take on if you come across something like that?
Yeah, what time of year was it?
February.
It's hard to say. I can't figure out. I've been catching a bunch of these I've been catching a bunch of these schooling fish right now that now that I've got live scope, I can see these fish. And before you could drive over them with down scan, but then you could never find them. You didn't know where they were, so you couldn't catch those fish unless you're like spider rigging, just driving around. But most of these fish are moving a lot. But sometimes you'll find them and they're just sitting there, and they're really, really, really tight. And they're not really feeding. You have to, really mess with them to get them to eat. And I don't know. I mean, they're packing in like that for safety. They're just small fish like that. The reason fish school for the most part is because there's safety in numbers. And so they're packing in for that sort of thing. I don't know if they can generate some sort of temperature regulation, if they're getting some refuge from cold by sticking together so tight. It's hard to say. I can't really answer that one, Brad.
Yeah, literally, I stayed with that school of fish for, I say 4 or 5 hours, and we might have moved 50 feet. And they were just stuck there, and we wound up catching a few of them, but, you had to be very slow and very methodical and just stick it right above their head, and they eventually would come up and take a bite of a minnow. But I've never seen that before, and I'm sure it was over safety. I mean, that's the only thing it could have been in my mind, because they wasn't feeding. I mean, they were just sticking together for that. All right, guys, if you got comments, and I know you should, or questions, you got something else, Tom?
I got one more that I've got to ask, because since your forward-facing sonar, your live sonar, whatever you want to call it, I get asked this now as much as I used to get asked, what's your favorite color jig? And that is do crappie sleep or get in a sleep-like state?
Man, I don't know. You guys are asking some crazy stuff now. They need to rest. I mean, like anything, they need to rest, and that may have been all that was happening with the fish Brad found. That because some of those schools are just like really stacked tight together and not moving, and then the other ones, the ones that are feeding good, that's the craziest thing. Now that we have this forward-facing sonar, the ones that are feeding good, you can stay with those fish, and you're so into catching them that you don't realize, like, it's been 5 minutes and you look around and you're in the middle of the lake and you think these fish are just swimming aimlessly wherever.
Yeah, right.
But there's some that aren't doing that, and they have to rest at some point. They're just like any other biological being. I mean, they've got to rest. I don't know if there's a sleep function, but there's certainly turn down your, slow your everything down and rest.
Awesome.
Well, we appreciate it, Josh. Can't thank you enough for coming back on the show. And, hey, we might even have a part 3 sometime with you.
Man, I enjoy it. I had a lot of fun last time. Got a lot of good questions. I still get questions from all kinds of people that view your show. So it's great. I love any opportunity to push a little bit of biology and education out there, because everybody's trying to do the right thing. We've talked about this a million times, and there's a lot of people that, with all the greatest intentions, I've had great intentions to fix my toilet, but I should have called the plumber. You know what I mean? Things went wrong, and
right.
Sometimes we have great intentions that if we did this with our lake, we could make it the greatest crappie lake on earth, and it doesn't always work the way you think it would. So I love educating and just answering questions. So thanks for having me.
Oh, man, thank you. Todd Gainer?
I'm good. I appreciate it.
All right, Brad Chappell here.
Todd Huckabee.
Josh Johnston.
Holla.
from big muddy river, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away.